process doesn't need to be perfectly completed because, Lord, it is endless. So I thank you that we can be involved with your will and your purpose while we are on this journey. And I thank you that we are being perfected, even as this journey is endless on this earth.
Recording in progress.
God, I pray that we would be less and less hindered by the over reasoning of the intellect and the misalignment of our soul and our soulish desires. But Lord, that all of us, all the parts of us would mature as we grow in sonship under your authority. And so, Lord, I thank you that you are teaching us these things and that we are meant to, that this is meant to be an extension of that process, this time and this learning. I pray that we would not get stuck in our minds, but we would always orient ourselves towards your ways and your heart. Amen.
Okay, you did it. Made it through. Before we jump into the teaching component, any thoughts? Did it end how you were anticipating or hoping? Did you like it? Did you not like the ending? Did you like the book? Did you not like the book? Are you left with questions? Thoughts?
I can appreciate how it turned out. Like, I think that it works really well for, like, he does a really good job of keeping the same theme and, well, not this, like, it has many different things going on, but he handles it really well, the author does, in how he wraps it up and stuff. I like the way he went about even showing us the whereabouts of the most tragic or negative type characters that have been major aspects of the earlier parts of the story. And the book is a different kind of book than other books that I've read before. But I really appreciate it because it helped. I like that it feels more meaningful than other books that I've read where I want to pay attention to it because I feel like it has something it's trying to tell me. Whereas the other book is just like, oh, this is a cool fantasy book that has very imaginative ideas. This one, even though it's fiction, it's meant to draw things in a way that feels very meaningful to me. So I enjoyed that.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
I really was very happy with the way that it ended. There were a couple things that I thought would happen, like when Ben-Hur saw Jesus carrying the cross, and that's kind of where most of it connected for him, that if he would have wanted it to be a certain way, it would have been that way. And there were a lot of little things that stood out to me, like in the death of Balthazar. Just the way it almost felt like he had to die because he wasn't living for anything but Christ, because his daughter didn't need him, and that wasn't the way that she was living. So he fulfilled his purpose in that. And I also thought the ending between the cultures in Iris and Esther and the interaction that they had, and just the resolve that Esther had in her heart to be at peace, and inviting Iris into obviously her home where she I guess, did a lot of damage, but I just thought it was interesting with the cultures and that. But I just love the way that Lew Wallace did wait till the last second for Ben-Hur to be changed. Like, it took him a long time, and I think I wasn't appreciating that until the end, because that needed to happen, because I think a lot of the times that's the way we are, where it takes us a very long time to get a simple concept, but it doesn't matter, because, you know, the Lord still is forgiving and has grace and is the same.
Thank you.
I'd say like the one issue I think I had until I thought about it a little more was that it felt like for all that he did, Ben-Hur got off relatively consequence-free, at least with the ending, in terms of not only the things that he actually did to people like Masala, but even to the very Roman mindset that he kind of carried throughout the majority of the book. It felt like the ending was very good for him, but that there was a lack of like, he learned that he was in the wrong and he changed. It was kind of just, he changed. And the more I thought about it, the more I think the fact that where that change takes place is the cross was actually very intentional from the author. I think part of the reason Ben-Hur actually was able to change direction and avoid the consequences of his actions was because that's kind of the point of the cross. That he does not have to bear the consequence of, you know, we say sin, but really the life that he lived. Because the life that he lived was leading towards death. And you kind of see that with Iris, right? She, in a way, lived a very similar life that Ben-Hur did. And through no effort of his own, Ben-Hur accepted the gift of the cross and in a way was able to change the direction of his life from something that was leading towards death to life. And I think that's even the point of kind of Iris's visit at the end there. It was funny, the way that they worded it was very poetic, but with how you can kind of see how Iris' story ended, it was the blue bay with all its laughing under the sun has yet its dark secrets. Had it a tongue, it might tell us of the Egyptian. Essentially, she drowned herself after killing Masala. So both of them, Roman, both of them very much, or I guess technically Iris Egyptian, but both Rome and Egypt, both idolizing war and death, both in the end got what they essentially sowed their whole lives. And so I think a lot of the things wrapped up how I mostly expected them to, and I'm happy, despite how the pacing felt very different than what I expected. I think that the cross being used as a moment of finality rather than a rising action was very interesting. You expect like the cross to be like, okay, and then we're going to get the resurrection, but you never see the resurrection. The resurrection in a way is kind of played out through how you see Ben-Hur's direction of life change. In a way, Ben-Hur and his life was headed towards death. And you see that with Iris, and you see that with Masala. And in a way, Ben-Hur was resurrected from that dead path and set onto a new path that is led into love and life. And so, yeah, there's some neat narrative things. Overall, I liked it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Something else I thought was interesting, sorry to share again, was just the small part of when Ben-Hur was, I'm not gonna be able to say it correctly, but when he was talking about seeing Jesus back when he was taken away in the beginning and him getting the water brought to him, and that contrast between them, like putting wine on a sponge and giving it to Jesus. And I thought that was really, I don't know, that was probably the one that stuck out to me the most, where he saw that. And and the contrast between the two, how Jesus gave and how they were giving back, and the way that Jesus related to him.
If you have your books, let's open up to chapter 1 of book 1. There is a beautiful symmetry to the way the author writes this work, and it is intentional on his part. You guys have observed, I think, pretty accurately some things that Lew Wallace was trying to communicate. Again, we can't really come to this work without considering the message that Lew Wallace was trying to communicate. Remember, when he set out to write this book, he was an atheist. At best, he was agnostic, meaning he was ignorant. He didn't really have any skin in the game one way or another. He just thought like it would be really interesting to write a book about the wise men or an article. He came into contact with a man who was that served under him in the war, in the Civil War, was an avowed atheist who knew his stuff. And in this nature of this conversation, Ben-Hur realized really quickly that he had no grasp of what Scripture talked about the story itself. And so when he set out to write this book, he read out to write a beautiful story. And I think what we can all agree upon is that something was given to him by way of inspiration that I don't think was merely a reflection of how sharp his mind was or how studious he was to find out information about a thing. Because what he writes about, the kingdom of God within is something that is certainly something that must be revealed to a person. And this is really, in some ways, Lew Wallace is Judah. He comes to this realization pretty late in the game, but it doesn't matter that he was late to the game, because the point is that he got to this place of shifting. And so the book starts out here. The Jebel Es Zubla is a mountain 50 miles and more in length, and so narrow that its tracey on the map gives it a likeness to a caterpillar crawling from the south to the north. Standing on its red and white cliffs and looking off under the path of the rising sun, one sees only the desert of Arabia, where the east winds so hateful to the vine growers of Jericho have kept their playground since the beginning. Its feet are well covered by sands tossed from the Euphrates, there to lie, for the mountain is a wall to the pasture lands of Moab and Ammon on the west, lands which else had been of the desert apart. And so we talked about this a long time ago, that what the author gives us is the setting as a character. And so we open up with what? We open up with the story of the stark lands and this traveling from the south to the north, right? There is also what is clearly talks about is this rising action or the rising sun that one sees only there. And so the perspective here of the author is intentional at the start of giving us a wasteland. And yet when we close out the book, we are left with then this, let me go to this last chapter or the last paragraph before he gives us some counsel as readers. It says, Ben-Hur arose excitedly. Ben-Hur here is now somebody who arises as a son. This is, of course, the thing that he has been searching for throughout the book, right? He is a son of Hur and a son of Arius, a son of Israel, a son of Rome, a son of confusion, right? He asks his mother, who am I to be? He is a man who has struggled to find an identity, and yet where we are left with him, right, in this way that is really intentional, is by not giving us the full resolution of what Ben-Hur's life will go on to become, but the author leaves us here with almost this journey that is starting anew. This place where the book leaves off, where the whole other epoch of time can now move forward. And we are, as the reader, left to imagine, what does Judah's life become? What does it look like? What is it fashioned like? Here in the context historically, we see that there is great oppression of what were called the Christians, which would have been a derogatory term there. You would not want to be called a Christian then. Certainly not in public, because it would have been a more fearful thing. And sure, you might have wanted to say, I'll stand with Christ, but that was not said in a way that we would include it now. It is akin to being called a little Christ, which was meant to be a mock to them. It was meant to undermine them, and it was meant to expose them in ways that put them at great danger, because at this time historically, to be a Christian would be to go the way of Jesus, in the same breath that you were to be beaten and scourged and murdered. It actually was state-sponsored, this whole kind of thing. And so we see that Ben-Hur arose excitedly. It says, "It is a great idea," he said. "I will not wait to begin it. Time forbids waiting. The ship was brought, the news of the suffering of our brethren shall take me to Rome. I will sail tomorrow." So when this is said here, and we'll get to why this is important to the narrative and what takes place, as you guys have observed, between the point where Judah is still thinking about starting a riot and overtaking the Roman rule there and setting Jesus free, to the moment at the cross and right before it, where his life is altered. But what does going to Rome mean for him? In Rome, there is certain death. That's what it looks like anyways, according to our historical understanding. Now, again, Lew Wallace is painting this picture with the backdrop of the Civil War. He is a general from the North. And he is writing this to this would be my interpretation of it. He is writing this not to those of the southern states per se, but he is writing this to those who in their hubris think that winning a war or winning at war justifies a man. And so he's writing this to himself and to the North, which had won the war. And he's writing to this kind of mindset. Right, there's a famous saying about history, that history is written by the victors. And this, of course, is true in part. But what Lew Wallace is after is the hubris within the human mind and heart. And how do we come to really grab hold of a thing? And this is where he, maybe putting himself even in the shoes of Judah, would say that really the hero, the heroic action, is the person who is willing to go and lay their life down. And of course, this is a reflection of a resurrected life for Judah. And we don't see the narrative here in the story about Christ rising, but we do see, this says again here, Ben-Hur what? Arose excitedly for a purpose. And he goes to Rome. And he says, "I will sail tomorrow." And we don't get the benefit of this outcome. But then let's follow how it goes. By this time, he is married to Esther. He has 3 children. So his life has been settled. We have some distance between the events of the cross and now this fixed point in time. He turned to Malach. "Get the ship ready, Malach, and be thou ready to go with me." "It is well," said Simon. "And thou, Esther, what sayest thou?" asked Ben-Hur. Esther came to his side and put her hand on his arm and answered, "So wilt thou best serve Christ. O my husband, let me not hinder, but go with thee and help." So what is the point that is here? Well, the author here in a brief second will give us the outcome of what happens to Judah and Esther. But what a testimony here, right? This interaction that Judah has had throughout his whole life, we finally see a man in just a few paragraphs here who is finally settled. And he settled to what end? Is he just settled in his mind? Has he just reconciled his inner life with his external life? Or is this a man who has been settled to the point of advancing the purposes, right? Remember that he was originally going to do what? Against Rome. What was his stated purpose with Rome? I'm going to learn to fight a war so that I might use that means of what I've learned against Rome. And yet we see in the closing action here, right, that he is somebody who does what? Who will use what he learned actually the right way to undermine the power of Rome. It continues this in a note to readers, which I love the way that Lew Wallace intersperses this throughout the text to remind us. And he does this as with intention, because what he is writing us to is in this way to say, like, I would remind the readers to do this, or the reader should be aware of this. He is writing that in a way that forces us to consider this as actual history. This is historical literature at its finest, because he's forcing our hand to engage in the material. He says this: if any of my readers visiting Rome will make a short journey to the catacomb. What is the catacomb? A tomb.
Masquerade.
Yeah. Of San Calixto, which is more ancient than that of San Sebastiano, he will see what became of the fortune of Ben-Hur and give him thanks. Out of the vast tomb, Christianity issued to supersede the Caesars. And what this is talking about is twofold. Is that it points out here in the text, actually, that Christians would go on, because they're so persecuted, to hold churches within the catacombs and within the places of death. And this is actually a big part of the gospel message, right? It is death unto life. But what we also will see is that Ben-Hur met his fate in Rome and was likely buried in Rome. And so why is that important to the narrative, do you think, that the author would leave us with this understanding of without giving us the narrative of how it ended, that it ended in this way? Why is it important? It's important because what we find in the end of Judah's life is that he wasn't fighting for the Jewish way of life, and he wasn't fighting for the Roman way of life. But he was willing to lay down his life for the way of God, and the purposes of God. And so we don't know the form or the fashion, but we can understand that what likely Judah did not do was take up arms. He didn't go to Rome to fight a war against Rome, right? And so if Judah didn't go to Rome with this mindset that war is everything, we can then, by definition, say that Judah likely went to Rome with what in his heart? Love is everything. He knew, right? He counted the cost. And along with it, he invited Malach into it, and Malach went, and likely Simonides went, and certainly Esther went. Into what? Into a place of willingly laying their lives down. And we get to imagine what does that look like. But the symmetry here that is really beautiful that we're given is, let's actually go to the penultimate chapter, second to last chapter here, where they're going to Calvary. And let's observe a few things that take place within Judah's transformation, because this is really, and I think you guys caught the essence of it, this is really important, and it speaks to how our lives are actually transformed. And as we saw with Judah in particular, his life was not transformed because he had it in his mind to do so. He disciplined himself to get there. None of that took place. This is a parallel again of how we started this lesson by asking, who is Jesus? Who is he? Not who was he, right? Because he's living. He's a person who is present. And the story at Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus brings his disciples and he says, who do people say that I am? And they begin to regurgitate, right? Some say you're this prophet or this person. And then Jesus asks this really like piercing question, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus responds by saying, this is true. And this can only be apocalypto, revealed to you by the Father. Right? And so what we discern and understand is that what is it that transforms the human soul? It is the revelation that God births in us. And we will see this is really critical to how that takes place within the soul. And Judah's life is a real clear picture of that. And just a few pages into the chapter here, it says this, then came the Nazarene. He was nearly dead. Every few steps he staggered as if he would fall. A stained gown, badly torn, hung from his shoulders over a seamless undertunic. His bare feet left red splotches on the stones. An inscription on a board was tied to his neck. A crown of thorns had been crushed hard down upon his head, making cruel wounds from which streams of blood, now dried and blackened, had run over his face and neck. The long hair, tangled in the thorns, was clotted thick. The skin, where it could be seen, was ghastly white. His hands were tied before him. Back somewhere in the city, he had fallen exhausted under the transverse beam of his cross, which, as a condemned person, custom required him to bear to the place of execution. Now, this was intentional on the Romans, and so it wasn't merely that he would go to the cross, but he was to do what? Take up his cross. Now, this is, again, a really important theological underpinning for us to understand that Christ did what? He took up his cross. He bare his cross. He held it, the weight of it. A man almost, at this point, almost dead, nearly dead. And why? Why was he nearly dead at this point? Was it merely that he had walked a long way? Or what happened to Jesus that precedes this part of the narrative? Well, he was scourged and beaten with something that's called a cat of nine tails. And I'm telling you all this not to be graphic, but just to give you some understanding of this mentality within Rome, right? War is everything. And so it makes sense that they would, that Roman world at the time would exact on Jesus this kind of punishment. So they have a thing called the cat of nine tails, which is basically like, we can imagine it as like a big pile of tar that had extending from it like shards of glass or metal, that would be very jagged. And so the point of this is that when it's used, it wouldn't leave a clean cut, right? Like if you got hit with a blade, a sharp blade, would give a really clean cut. And that's easy. That's easy for you to mend in one sense, unless it cuts deep. But what these cat of nine tails were meant to do would to be like on a whip, and they would whip into the backs of those who would receive it. And that was painful enough because the cat of nine tails, which would have many whips going off on it, would stick into the skin. And then the actual painful part would not be getting whipped, but would be when the person removed the whip, because what would take place is the flesh would be torn away from the body. And they would do this. They had an exact science. Does anyone know how many times you would lash someone?
Was it 99?
Not 99. It'd be 39 times. So 40 was kind of the number that they would consider to be like the way that it would be finished. Like the 40th time would be kind of the death blow. And so they would, again, from the Roman mindset, the point of this was to torture a person to get them to this place of near death. Now, again, we have to imagine that our protagonist here, Judah Ben-Hur, seeing this, might have some memory of what life was like in the galleys as a slave, right? Being put under great torment. And yet what he will see is that this man, this innocent man, this man that he's observed do what? Bring people back from the dead, heal people, to be soft spoken and kind and loving, that this man who seemingly deserves nothing was given a far worse punishment than he could endure. And it is here, right? It's at this place that we see that Christ is carrying his cross, not from the place of his own strength, not as somebody who at this point was vigorous and filled with life, but from this point where his body was broken. And so when it talks about how a crown of thorns was crushed down and blood streams down, or it talks about how his bare feet left red splotches upon the stone, that was because his body was completely like broken in a way. Right? This is not a man who is operating out of strength, but this begs the question, how was Jesus able to carry the burden of the cross? Because there is only one thing that compels people to act in this way. It is why we have seen real life stories. I'm reminded of even now a story in the 80s. It was a really popular story, and I don't know if it's apocryphal, meaning it's fake, or if it was just said, but it was a story of a mother who got in a car accident on a bus with her kids, and her kids were being crushed under the weight of it, and the mother rips, in a moment, rips the seats away, this superhuman strength. Well, what is the motivator there for that mother to do such a thing? Or what is the motivation for somebody to run back into a burning house to save their loved ones? Or what is the motivation of somebody who is willing to take a bullet for another? What is the motivation that Jesus bears the cross with? Well, if war is everything to the Roman mind, and that is what they're trying to prove by his torture, what Christ is demonstrating is the measure of his love for mankind. And I know we hear, sometimes we hear this, right? This language that can be so free in the way that we observe Christ's life. And we can, if we're not careful, we can become disassociated with the actual life that he lived and death that he endured for our end. And it's no understatement here that Christ bared the burden of love. And this is why it is so powerful when Scripture tells us that for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated now, yet seated at the right hand of God. You see, the motivation here, I think, well, I know, is really what transforms us. When we understand rightly what Christ has done, there is no way for us to come away from that and with any sincerity and not see the debt that he paid on our behalf. And I think this is a really critical point that Lew Wallace is making here, stripping down all of the religious and theological and all of these other flowery ways of trying to evangelize, of just painting this really clear picture. His hands were tied before him. Back somewhere in the city he had fallen, exhausted under the transverse beam of his cross, which, as a condemned person, not as a Messiah, not as the Christ. And this is, again, even what we will see. Simonides is struggling with this. Judah is struggling with this. Some of the other Galileans who are only two, right? There was supposed to be this big army, will struggle with. And in fact, we'll see that this is actually what pushes away a lot of those who are coming to fight on Judah's behalf, to say, well, we don't even believe in him anymore, because how can he let it even come to this? How can he even be a king? Because a king is meant to do what? To win the battle, to fight, to overcome. Custom required him to bear the place of execution. Now, a countryman carried the burden in his stead, Simon the Cyrene. 4 soldiers went with him as a guard, and this is like what Simon the Cyrene represents scripturally is again It was necessary. The Romans allowed it because they wanted to make sure Christ got to the cross to die. But it wasn't the Romans that were writing the story. See, God, of course, was narrating this. And what we see in the life of Simon the Cyrene is you and I, that we are meant to do what? To take up the cross of Christ. To bear that burden as well. Not for the sins of the world, but in response to the love that Christ has extended us. 4 soldiers went with him as a guard against the mob, who sometimes nevertheless broke through and struck him with sticks and spit upon him. Now again, what does this represent, right? The throne of humanity, who still to this day will mock what Christ has done, and will minimize it. Yet no sound escaped him, neither remonstrance nor groan, nor did he look up until he was nearly in front of the house sheltering Ben-Hur and his friends, all of whom were moved with quick compassion. Esther clung to her father, and he, strong of will as he was, trembled. Balthazar fell down speechless. Even Ben-Hur cried out, "Oh my God, oh my God." Then, as if he divined their feelings or heard the exclamation, the Nazarene turned his wan face towards the party and looked at each one. So they carried the look in memory through life. You see, you guys, one of the reasons why I think this book is beautiful, and one of the reasons why I really want to encourage you to continue to consider who Christ is to you, is reflected here. Because the reality is not how we see Christ. That is not the greater reality. The greater reality is how Christ sees us. You see, we will falter and we will fail and we will stumble. And we will be like many of the people here, Judah being the prime one, who will miss it sometimes because we can't quite see clearly. And yet, what you guys have observed, I want to point this out, in beautifully articulated through your poetry, through the thoughts that were expressed here, what you beautifully observed, right? It is through the lens or the eyes of Christ that we see him time and time again, see something in someone that they can't even see in themselves. That he is calling us to the very best in us. Right? He is trying to draw out in us the life of God. The true nature of who God created us to be, the image and the likeness. And here, as Jesus will do later, we know this historically with Peter, right? We talked about him a lot, but Peter said he wouldn't deny Christ 3 times. He denies him 3 times. And what happens at the last denial is that we see in the narrative that Christ looks at Peter. And Peter is, of course, broken by this. And in some ways, the reason that Peter was broken is because Peter is still seeing himself through the lens. You can look at that narrative and think, man, how hard it was of Peter. But what kind of eyes was Jesus peering at Peter with then, do you think? Was it eyes of condemnation? Or was it eyes of love? And so really what undid Peter was this love that was extended in the same way here. That when his face turned towards the party, they looked at each one. So they carried the look in memory through life. They could see he was thinking of them and not himself. And in the dying eyes, gave them blessing he was not permitted to speak. And so what was the joy that was set before Jesus? Why would Jesus endure this? Certainly, it is true that he desired greatly to be obedient to the Father. That is certainly true. But what is the joy that was set before him? If not the redemption of all those who would become sons of God's house. Right? Wasn't Jesus in his life always acting out of this place of love and compassion to do what? Not merely to draw us in so that we could say we're a part of something, but to draw us closer to the heart of the Father and the life of the Father. Where are thy legions, son of Hur? Asked Simonides, aroused. Hannes can tell thee better than I. What? Faithless? All but these 2. then all is lost, and this good man must die. He's beginning to get the picture here, right? This is, of course, true. This good man must die. But who is the one who places Christ on the cross? What do you guys think? Who puts Jesus on the cross? There are many ways to answer this. And there's certain levels where they're all true. Who put Jesus on the cross?
The Father.
The Father. Certainly. Why? Why the Father?
Which is what he was created for.
Yeah. Well, the Father sees, right, that in order to redeem all of mankind, he must give what? He must pay the ransom, right? He is the one who has set the standard, right? For the wages of sin is death. But beyond the Father, because that is certainly true, who else put Christ on the cross?
His own people.
His own people. Yeah, and this is observed really quickly. Like, man, we're observing like Pontius Pilate washing his hands, and Judah even says this. Well, man, if this person like is washing his hands, and not the people who actually are kin with this man, how much more so is the blood of this man on us? And so, certainly, we know this, right? It is our sin that has placed Christ on the cross. But who else? Those are two pretty big ones where I think we're missing one really significant one here.
Did you say Jesus put himself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He put himself there as an obedient son. Now this is, you guys, this is why what Jesus has done is so beautiful, because it was for the joy, and this was his joy. His joy was to delight his Father and to follow in his Father's will. But his joy was for the redemption of his brothers. And this is why Jesus will pray in the Garden of Gethsemane with drops of blood coming out of his sweat. Father, if it's possible, nevertheless, it's not my will. Not my will be done. And so he goes willingly, out of his own volition. He allows it, right? And we know this, even if we only read from the narrative. What do we see in the gospel narratives? Is that time and again Jesus slipped through the crowd and was not able to be held over. Time and time and time again. Yet this time it's different, right? He allows himself to be arrested. He allows himself to be scourged and beaten. He allows himself to take up a cross and to walk with his body breaking down, knowing that his life is ebbing away, and knowing the purpose by which he came. And in what way did he do it? Well, it's talking about here in the narrative that he did it silently. He wasn't giving way to the weight of the pain and the struggle, but he was doing it for love and for joy. And so his mindset was one that moved beyond the circumstances of life. We follow the story a little bit further, and then we see, I think again, something that is just so beautiful in the crucifixion. And that is when they observe that what happens to Balthazar. That he dies, right? And so we see that in the narrative at the start, Balthazar is coming to the birth of Christ. And that is when he is made alive. And then when Christ passes, he has as well passed on with Christ. And Balthazar is meant to be for us the type of people that we can be. It is what one author might say, it's our greater angels, where we arrive at a place of true obedience, of true observation, of walking in the right ways. And so Balthazar is in the same way that he was made alive in Christ, he is gone to be with Christ. He has passed away in Christ. And then we see then in the life of Simonides, right? That this is a man too that was the suffering servant, and he sees within Christ this beauty of laying his life down, and then gets this perspective that it is not through war or through political means, but he becomes more settled even in himself. And we see in the life of Esther that she has now resigned her life to what? And again, let's reflect upon this in knowing what she experienced in the story of her own mother and father. She resigned her life to her husband, which is by extension to say that she resigned her life with him to Christ. She's willing to go to Rome along with her husband, no matter the cost. Why? For the sake of love. Now, this is a massive shift. And so what is, beyond the text here that we're reading, what is Lew Wallace trying to communicate to a country that has been fractured by war? Is war the thing that is going to resolve their differences? No, it's love. But what does that love look like? Because it's a very particular brand of love, right? As we've observed, this type of love is the type of love that lays its own life down for the sake of others. That is not self-seeking. It is quiet, and it is resigned to the purposes of God. All right, and so Ben-Hur leads them, and we see these lines throughout. I am the resurrection and the life. This is the reminder to him, right? He hears it as a voice. And he asks this, and as the men repeat a question to grasp and fix the meaning, he asked, gazing at the figure on the hill, fainting under its crown, who is the resurrection and who the life? I am, the figure seemed to say, and say it for him. For instantly he was sensible of a peace such as he had never known, right? This is the peace which surpasses all understanding. The peace which is the end of doubt and mystery and the beginning of faith and love and clear understanding. From this dreamy state, Ben-Hur was aroused by the sound of hammering. On the summit of the knoll, he observed then what had escaped him before, some soldiers and workmen preparing the crosses. The holes for planting the trees were ready, and now the transverse beams were being fitted to their places. Bid the men make haste, said the high priest to the centurion. These, and he pointed to the Nazarene, must be dead by the going down of the sun and buried, that the land may not be defiled. Such is the law. With a better mind, a soldier went to the Nazarene and offered him something to drink, but he refused the cup. Then another went to him and took from his neck the board, and with the transcription upon it, which he nailed to the tree of the cross, and the preparation was complete. The crosses are ready, said the centurion to the pontiff, who received the report with a wave of the hand and the reply. Let the blasphemer go first. The Son of God should be able to save himself. We will see. Again, this continues on, and Judah observes these words. Again, he says, behold, Ben-Hur answered calmly, I have been in a dream, Simonides, and heard it, and why all this should be, and why it should go on. It is the will of the Nazarene. It is God's will. Let us do as the Egyptian here. Let us hold our peace and pray. As he looked upon the knoll again, the words were wafted to him through the awful stillness. I am the resurrection and the life. You see, what I think is taking place within Judah, and you guys have rightly observed this, and it's what makes the cross here really critical for Judah, is that what is taking place on the cross is not merely the death of Christ, but it's the death of what in Judah? It's the death of him proclaiming his own imagination of how things should be. It is the death of him proclaiming his own will. See, the reason the resurrection here is not drawn out is because the author is trying to get at what? At the heart of it, he's trying to deal with the kingdom of the soul. And Christ cannot be the king of the soul as long as the soul has another king sitting on the throne. The problem that Ben-Hur, that Judah had, was himself. He was his enemy. You see, he overcame Masala, and fair enough, that was an easy battle for him to fight. And he overcame even in the sense of his love and his affection towards his mother and sister, and was gifted with a grace by Christ to receive them. And yet he couldn't fully grasp onto Christ. Why? Because there was no room in his soul to receive the King. But as soon as Judah has this revealed to him, right, his understanding is then opened up in a way. And he sees that the purpose of Christ on the cross is the will of the Nazarene, and it is the will of God. And he makes peace here that it must be his own will as well. It must be purposed in his own heart. He bowed reverently as to a person speaking. Up on the summit, meantime, the work went on, and the guard took the Nazarene clothes from him, so that he stood before the millions naked. The stripes of the scourging he had received in the early morning were still bloody upon his back, yet he was laid piteously down and stretched upon the cross. First, the arms upon the transverse beam, and spikes were sharp, a few blows, and they were driven through tender palms. Next, they drew his knees up until the soles of his feet rested flat upon the tree. Then they placed one foot upon the other, one spike fixed both on them. The dulled sound of the hammering was heard outside the guarded space, and such as could not hear, yet saw the hammer as it fell, shivered with fear, and withal not a groan or a cry or a word of remonstrance from the sufferer, nothing at which an enemy could laugh, nothing a lover would regret. You see, he didn't even cry out. He was so settled for the joy that was set before him, that each blow of the hammer and the nails piercing through his flesh, he is reminded of his obedience to the Father and his love for those who would come into the Father's ways. Which way will thou have him face? And I love this part. Asked a soldier bluntly. Towards the temple, the pontiff replied. In dying, I would have him see the holy house has not suffered by him. And the reason that he's doing this here is that Jesus says that he'll destroy the temple, and in 3 days he will raise it up again. And what is Jesus talking about? The physical temple that all of Israel has imagined as their help and their hope? No, the temple of the human life, the soul, right? Being made alive, the temple of the body here. It continues down, Jesus says these famous words, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And this is really a beautiful prayer for you and I. Why? Because we often don't understand fully. Now, this actually is tied back into the Old Testament, because there are grain offerings, sin offerings, guilt offerings, all of these offerings that are operated in the book of Leviticus paints it out. But why do they do all of these things? Why do we have sacrificial systems? Like all of this stuff is to make atonement, right? To demonstrate a measure of repentance. And yet, what God does even within the offerings that are made is that he has a way for us to offer up or to make sacrifices for the sins that we are unaware of. Now, this is exactly what Jesus is talking about here, right? That we're to be forgiven to the extent that we don't really fully understand. The cross, reared now above all other objects and standing singly out against the sky, was greeted with a burst of delight. And all who could see and read the writing upon the board over the Nazarene's head made haste to decipher it. Soon, as read, the legend was adopted by them and communicated, and presently the whole mighty concourse was ringing the salutation from side to side and repeated it with laughter and groans. King of the Jews, hail, King of the Jews. Ben-Hur then, this is where he really begins to understand the nature of the cross and the importance of the cross. And then we see that there is some reflection here about the three wise men. Again, this symmetry. And leaving Simonides lost in wonder at such a speech from him, he went where Balthazar was kneeling nearby and laid his hand upon the good man's shoulder. O wise Egyptian, hearken. Thou alone wert right. The Nazarene is indeed the Son of God. Balthazar drew him down to him and replied feebly, I saw him, a child in the manger, where he was first laid. It is not strange that I knew him sooner than thou, but oh, that I should live to see this day. Would I had died with my brethren, happy Melchior, happy Gaspar. Comfort thee, said Ben-Hur. Doubtless, they too are here. The dimness went on deepening into obscurity, and that into positive darkness, and without deterring the bolder spirits upon the knoll. And after the other, the thieves were raised on their crosses, and the crosses planted. The guard was then withdrawn, and the people set free, closed in upon the height, and surged up it. Like a converging wave, a man might take a look when a newcomer would push on him and take his place to be in turn pushed on. And there was laughter and ribaldry and revilements, all for the Nazarene rite. And then we get the story of the thieves on the cross, where one mocks Jesus and the other simply asks to be with him in paradise. And this leaves us as we come to a close here. Let's see. As we come to a close, then some years later, after these words, God the Father and Christ the Son. It says about 5 years after the crucifixion, Esther, the wife of Ben-Hur, sat in her room in the beautiful villa of Mizraim. It was noon with a warm Italian sun, making summer for the roses and vines outside. Everything in the apartment was Roman, except that Esther wore the garments of a Jewish matron. Tirzah and 2 children at play upon a lion's skin on the floor were her companions, and one had only to observe how carefully she washed them to know that the little ones were hers. Time had treated her generously. She was more than ever beautiful, and in becoming mistress of the villa, she had realized one of her childhood cherished dreams. In the midst of this simple, home-like scene, a servant appeared in the doorway and spoke to her. A woman in the atrium to speak with the mistress. Let her come. I will receive her here. Presently, the stranger entered. At sight of her, the Jewess arose and was about to speak, and she hesitated, changed color, and finally drew back, saying, I have known you, good woman. You are. I was Iris, the daughter of Balthazar. Esther conquered her surprise and bade the servant bring the Egyptian a seat. No, said Iris coldly. I will retire directly. The two gazed at each other. We know what Esther presented. A beautiful woman, a happy mother, a contented wife. On the other side, it was very plain that fortune had not dealt so gently with her former rival. The tall figure remained with some of its grace, but an evil life had tainted the whole person. You see, it was the life that was in Iris, right? That is her undoing. It is the choices she's made. It is the way she's postured herself. The face was coarse. The large eyes were red and pursed beneath the lower lids. There was no color in her cheeks. The lips were cynical and hard, and general neglect was leading rapidly to premature old age. Her attire was ill-chosen and draggled. The mud of the road clung to her sandals. Iris broke the painful silence. These are thy children? Esther looked at them and smiled. Yes. Will you not speak to them? I will scare them, Iris replied. Then she drew closer to Esther and, seeing her shrink, said, Be not afraid. Give thy husband a message for me. Tell him his enemy is dead, and that for the much misery he brought me, I slew him. His enemy? The Messiah. Further tell thy husband that for the harm I sought to do him, I have been punished until even he would pity me. Tears arose in Esther's eyes, and she was about to speak. Nay, said Iris, I do not want pity or tears. Tell him finally, I have found that to be a Roman is to be a brute. Farewell. She moved to go. Esther followed her. Stay and see my husband. He has no feeling against you. He sought for you everywhere. He will be your friend. I will be your friend. We are Christians. The other was firm. No, I am what I am of choice. I will be over shortly. But Esther hesitated. Have we nothing you should wish? Nothing to the countenance of the Egyptian softened. Something like a smile played about her lips. She looked at the children upon the floor. There is something, she said. Esther followed her eyes and with quick perception answered, it is yours. Iris went to them and knelt on the lion's skin and kissed them both. Rising slowly, she looked at them, then passed to the door and out of it without a parting word. She walked rapidly and was gone before Esther could decide what to do. As we talked about, we know how the story ends. And so, if war is everything and love is nothing, right? This is what is presented as the Roman way. And then if we see that really, no, it is love that is everything and war is nothing. What is the end of both of those ways? And this is really where the life of Esther and Iris come into to be compared to one another. What is the end that Iris experiences, with war being the primary? What is the end? What is the end of war? Death. But what is the end of love? It's death. See, both of those ways of life end in death. But there is only one death that can be chosen that leads to life. And this is a really important distinction between those cultures, right? What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and to forfeit what? His soul. And so what needs to die within us consistently on the regular? What is the thing that we have to take up our cross for? If not to continue to put to death the soul, right? The soulish nature within man. But we have to understand that this is a message that Lew Wallace was getting at, right? Is that we have within us the ability to choose what kind of death we want to experience. A death that is birthed out of war, or a death that is birthed out of love. I will leave you with this thought. And this week, actually, for our last class, I want you to consider the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, verses 13 through 35. This is how we will tie it up next week. It's actually my favorite interaction with Jesus. And I think it will help us to bring some closure. But let us consider this, you guys. This way of life that we're living in love goes through death. We know that, right? We all know that. We all understand it. And yet this is something that we have to continue to walk out. And so I would just encourage you to take some time this week. I know some of you have verbalized that you're struggling with your essays, and that's okay. I didn't anticipate when I assigned it being the easiest thing to do. And I've also had some of you say, I'm not sure I can really encapsulate it in an essay, and you've asked to do it in poetry form. And if that works better for you, then I say, amen. By all means, do it in that way. The purpose of that was for you to wrestle, like Judah has wrestled a little bit with, not just the person of Christ, because that is one component of it, but how do you respond to him in relationship with him? Because the reality is that we all must come to his cross first before we can take up our own. Because we have to lay down our lives for this sake. And I want you to hear me clearly. I'm not implying that no one here has laid down their life and that no one here is like pursuing Christ. But this is a question we have to arrive at again and again, is to consider, is there anything that I'm holding on to in my life? Because you cannot simultaneously hold the cross of Christ and hold your own way. Again, Jesus demonstrated it by saying, Father, not my will, but yours be done. And the will, right? The place that we hold the will in is in what area? In the soul. It is what our soul desires. And so I would just continue to invite you in this process, but in a particular way. Not with guilt, not with shame, not with judgment, not with anything except joy. For the joy that is set before you. For the joy. What is the things the Spirit of God is wanting you to let go of and to allow God to redeem in you? And we will leave it there and take a few minute break. Thank you all for your faithfulness in reading. I know for a few of you this was a difficult read. Secondarily to this, I would like you to give some, and this can be the one thing that you maybe write to me this week, to just give me some assessment of what is a lesson or two or something like a point that you're taking home from the book itself. And so you can encapsulate that in like bullet points. You can say this is the one overriding thing. You can write however you feel be released to do that. But if you guys could have that to me by Sunday, because I would like to at least finish our class having some conversation around that as well. All right, that's it. Thanks. Love you guys.